Hi there, my name is DeGenaro. I'm a junior at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and I'll be presenting my research examining the perceived meaning of African American English dialect aspectual markers. African American English is a systematic, rule-governed linguistic variety, sometimes portrayed as improper, sometimes portrayed as broken English. These are not accurate. It's often co-opted on social media, especially by younger people. Its grammar differs in some really significant ways from Standard American English. So Standard American English is what I'm speaking right now. One of these key differences is that AAE, African American English, makes use of aspectual markers. So this is a term that's used by linguists to describe a category of word that provides information about habituality and completion, the aspect of a sentence, which is kind of like tense, but not really. Has some differences. So what do these markers look like? Well, the three that I chose to study, and these are three really common ones, are invariant B. I be shopping at Stop and Shop when I need groceries. Contrast that with SAE. I generally shop at Stop and Shop when I need groceries. These two sentences mean pretty much the same thing. Remote past been is another one. Been is usually stressed or phonologically emphasized in some way. It been rained. It rained a long time ago. And then lastly, we have resultant state done, which kind of indicates completion. And it's generally unstressed. I didn't submitted my assignment. I have already submitted my assignment. So questions to be addressed. Do average users of TikTok and other social media platforms, do they have better intuitions about the meaning of these markers? So basically, people who are on social media a lot, are they kind of learning how to use these markers, even if they're not native speakers of AAE? Secondly, are people from regions where AAE is not commonly heard more likely to misunderstand these markers? Which I know is a mouthful, but all I mean by this is basically if you come from a place where AAE is heard often, do you understand it better? Versus the opposite. If you come from a place where AAE is not used, do you have a hard time understanding it? Even if you're not a native speaker. And finally, is Gen Z more likely to misunderstand these markers? So something I wanted to look at, if young people are online more, they may be seeing this language co-opted more, used incorrectly more often. They might not be learning how to use it correctly. They might be learning incorrect ways to use it. So are they really, using it incorrectly or not? So on to methods. So I have an example stimulus here at the bottom of the slide. It's kind of like a pair of sentences, just like I had in the other slide. I be still in bed. I'm still in bed right now. The difference here is that these two sentences do not mean the same thing as each other. They're different. So I be still in bed indicates habituality. It might be I be still in bed at 6 a.m. every day because I get up at 7. Versus I'm still in bed right now only describes the immediate present. It doesn't describe any kind of habituality or any kind of repeating action or continuation of something. So basically the way that this worked is people filled in my Google form. And as they were going through it, they were presented with stimuli that looked like this. I had 30 stimuli. And each stimulus was accompanied by the same true or false question. The following pair of sentences have the same meaning. You can mark true or you can mark false. So on top of that, at the beginning, there was a little primer on AAE, so people understood what they were being asked about and kind of how to interpret these stimuli. And then at the end, I asked a few demographic questions, which I'll talk about here a little bit. So the demographics that I collected, basically, all of these things were used as variables for t-tests. So I wanted to test whether any of these kinds of variables, native speaker of AAE, AAE use in the community, whether you're Gen Z, I wanted to see if any of these variables were significant and whether you could understand these different markers. And I'll show the results pretty soon. So I had 37 participants. They were just friends and family who saw me post it on social media and were kind enough to lend a few minutes of their time to take it. So of those 37, 3 claimed to speak AAE natively, 21 claimed to hear it in their communities, 33 of them were Gen Z, not that surprising because I'm 20, 36 of them, so just only one of them claimed to not understand it, 36 of them claimed to understand AAE, and every single person used at least one of TikTok, Instagram, or Twitter. And these 3 platforms are well known for having users who co-opt AAE terms. So preliminary results, and I do want to emphasize that these are preliminary. I would like to have a larger sample size than I had to draw a real conclusion or to say that something is truly significant, but I'll go through these results a little bit. So things marked with a single asterisk had a p-value below 30%. So a standard literature value would be like 0.05, 5% is considered to be significant. I took 30% to be significant just because of my small sample size. And then 20% was the one that I marked with a double S. This is actually 19%. So this one actually really looks like it does have the potential to be significant with just a larger sample size. Again, I did not have enough non-Gen Zers to really draw a conclusion, but there seems to be a trend for sure. Gen Z mostly outperforms older people on this task, on all of the tasks that are involved in this. So this is kind of possible evidence of convergence. So there's this debate among linguists who study AAE, whether AAE is becoming more like SAE or less like SAE, whether they're becoming more like each other or not. And this is kind of evidence of the convergence idea as opposed to divergence, because younger people are seeming to do better than older people. Linguistic community, on the other hand, wasn't really very significant at all. It's the last row down there, as you can see. That just looks like statistical error. None of those are very different from each other in each pair. So my hypothesis about this is that social media maybe has a normalizing effect. So everyone is on social media in this survey that I did, every single person, and they may all be being exposed to AAE. Even if it's not correct AAE, at least maybe some of it is correct, or maybe it isn't. But everyone's being exposed in maybe kind of a similar way, and that might mean that social media just doesn't really have much of an effect. And something that we need to think about more is that people from communities where AAE wouldn't be heard normally, they're still being exposed to it on social media. And so this might be having an effect, this normalizing effect that I'm talking about. And the last thing that's kind of interesting to note is that B really presented a challenge. People had a really hard time understanding B as opposed to been or done. And I have a little hypothesis about that I'll talk about on my next slide. And just to kind of address the social media question that I had from the beginning, there's not very much to say. It doesn't seem like social media has a big effect most of the time. There are these 3 boxes here that I marked as significant. Again, this may be attributed to statistical error because, again, I had some very small sample sizes when I chopped up my data like this. But it is interesting to note that bin Instagram users had a better time with bin, and Instagram and TikTok users had a worse time with done. So something to think about for sure. And basically further research and implications here, I really would like to do a bigger study. So more people, particularly with regard to generation, I think is really, really important. To confirm that generation actually is a big factor, and this would really support that convergence hypothesis that I was talking about as well, if it confirmed my results positively. A second thing to think about is the fact that this study really shows that where you're from doesn't seem to matter very much. What matters is your exposure to AAE. It doesn't matter if you're from a place that uses AAE. It matters if you hear it. That can be online too. And so something we might want to start thinking about is replacing this term speech community that sociolinguists use all the time with something like linguistic exposure. Because linguistic exposure is a little broader and can cover things like your online community as well. And even people outside your online community who you encounter anyway through an explore page or whatever. And finally, I think it's worth investigating in more detail why B is so tricky as opposed to done and been. People seem to have an easier time with these two. And one hypothesis about that is just that B is a more difficult thing to describe in SAE. We can kind of describe been okay with a long time ago, and we can kind of describe done already with have or have already. But B is a little harder to talk about in SAE. It requires a little more effort. It can kind of mean continuation. It can kind of mean habituality. It can kind of mean that something is ongoing. All of these meanings are sorts of things that are described all collectively by B. Just something to think about. All right, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it. And bye.